Welcome to High Strangeness, where we ask questions and explore all that is strange and unexpected in our reality.
Welcome to High Strangeness. I'm Tony, and this is the place where we talk about all things strange and unexpected in our reality. If you're like me, I marvel at how amazing nature is. There are plants, trees, and the outdoors. And then there's Mother Nature, who gives and provides abilities and defense mechanisms for animals and organisms. But then, of course, comes along the humans, who just can't help but turn everything into Trojan horses. So whether it's corporate lobbying and collusion, metal fashioned like this bullet for protection or aggression, or the way we process our foods, do we ever really know what's in front of us? Now, today we're going to talk about something that on the surface seems small, but if you haven't looked into this and learned about this, you are going to be surprised. My guest today is someone who has been sounding the alarm on this very important thing for a while. And after her most recent book, it's generating more attention. So much so that she's been on the mic with personalities like Tucker Carlson, RFK Jr., and others. And her name is Chris Newby. Chris Newby is an award-winning medical science writer and the senior producer of the Lyme disease documentary called Under Our Skin, which premiered at the Tribeca Film Festival and was a 2010 Oscar semifinalist. Her book, Bitten, The Secret History of Biological Weapons and Lyme disease, has won 3 international book awards for journalism and narrative nonfiction. She has 2 engineering degrees and has worked as a science and technology writer for Stanford Medical School, Apple, and other Silicon Valley companies. And guess what? She's here with us today. Chris, welcome to the show. I'm so excited to have you here. How are you doing today?
Great. And thanks for inviting me, Tony. It was a chance meeting in Utah and you invited me on. So it's great.
I'm so excited about it. And for everybody's benefit, I actually met Chris and didn't know about her background. Found out she wrote a book, this book that we're going to talk about. I read it in a couple weeks quickly. And I could not believe how good this book was. So we're going to get into that today. And so I'm so excited you're here. I want to ask you, how's your fall been so far? Pretty good?
Yeah, I mean, we've had beautiful fall colors in Utah and we had out of town guests and we went hiking in the mountains. So it's been a great fall.
It's amazing. And I know those colors are changing right about now. You are a Utah resident now, or are you just here for research?
I'm a Utah resident now. I was in the San Francisco Bay Area, right near Stanford University, where I went to school for 32 years. And my husband and I moved here in during COVID.
Yeah. We got a lot of people during COVID, actually. It was pretty amazing out here. I think the remote work capability really drove people to other places. And so we got a lot of interesting people coming in. So it was awesome.
I think Utah's the best kept secret.
Me too.
It's just an amazing place if you love nature.
Yes.
And weirdness.
Right. No doubt there. I lived on the East Coast, grew up there, and came out for college, and pretty much never went back. I was like, this is a great place. So you're right. So much to do here, such a variety of different outdoor activities. Okay, Chris, we got a lot to talk about. You're a very busy person. I know you're working on a new project. And so I do appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. Like I mentioned before, I read your book. I was amazed at how much information was in there and what I learned. And really, I just can't believe that I didn't understand or know that much about this topic. I felt like, wow, how could I not have known or heard some of these things? But truth is, a lot of people don't know about what you're sharing. And I think that's pretty powerful. Before we get into the book, though, I want to start off with a few basic questions because we don't know where people are. And of course, I think most people have heard of Lyme's disease, but not necessarily much about it. Yeah, I think you get it from a tick is what people think, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
so Let's get into some basic questions and then jump into things a little bit deeper. What makes a tick a good carrier of disease?
They're pretty much the vampires of the animal community. They bite you and they ingest blood, and in the process of their guts bellowing in and out, whatever germs are in their stomach will enter your bloodstream.
Hmm.
And there are probably in the US about 18 to 20 germs that can be transmitted. Usually there's 1 to 2 that get transmitted, and one of those is Lyme disease, which is a corkscrew shaped bacterium that is really good at drilling through your tissue and invading your immune system. And sometimes it creates a round, expanding red rash. But many times, they say a third of the time, you don't see that rash and you don't know you have been infected with Lyme disease, the bacteria that causes Lyme disease,
Yeah.
until you have flu-like symptoms.
And that bacteria, did you call? No, it was a
It's a
parasite.
bacterium.
Okay.
It's a subcategory of bacterium, which is spiral shaped. So other gingivitis is spiral shaped from that same family.
Mhm.
Syphilis, that wonderful disease, also.
Spirochetes? Is that what
Spirochetes,
that's
or
what
but
you
in
call it?
French, you might say spirochetes.
Okay. Yeah. So these things are like little danger things, right? You don't want them on you, for sure. Are there a lot of different types of ticks, or, is there many different types, or is there just, a few basic ones?
Yeah, there are a lot of different ticks. Usually the deer ticks, the hard body ticks, are the ones that transmit Lyme disease. There's a new kid in town, Lone Stars. They used to be in the southern United States, and they're migrating upwards for reasons I'll tell you later. And they're really aggressive stalking ticks that can give you diseases like spotted fever or red meat allergy or those deadly Powassan or Heartland viruses.
Yeah. And I'm wondering, with ticks, in my mind, I've always envisioned, oh, be careful when you walk under trees; they'll fall on you. Is that the main way they find uh, their new host, or are they attracted in some way? Do they have a technique for getting on people?
Yeah, first of all, we know they've been on planet Earth for at least 99 million years, so they're really good at getting a blood meal. And they do this activity called seeking. For the deer ticks, a lot of times they hang out on at the top of blades of grass or tips of bushes, and they wave their front pad arms around, and they have sticky pads.
Mhm.
So with hooks, with grappling hooks like velociraptors. So when you go by, they grab on. They Some ticks, like the Lone Stars, uh, swarm, and both ticks, they sense carbon dioxide. So that's the chemical we breathe out. We breathe in oxygen and breathe out, and so they know you're there because of that, and then they're at the ready.
Mm, sounds terrifying.
In California, the ticks hang out on logs and picnic benches.
Oh, great. People watch where you sit, right?
Right.
Now, is there a are there trouble spots in the country around the country? Is there areas where there's higher populations, or are ticks just everywhere?
I would say ticks are everywhere, uh, but there's a higher concentration of the deer ticks that carry Lyme disease on the eastern seaboard, the 13 colonies, and they
Mhm.
are spreading, which I'll discuss some reasons why later, up into Canada and down into the Carolinas, across to the Great Lakes states. So there are other ticks, for example, the badass Lone Stars south of the Mason Dixon line. And then there's the wood tick in the Rocky Mountains. And the wood ticks carry a very deadly spotted fever,
Hmm.
rickettsias. And
Rickettsial.
then, okay, in California, they just discovered a new sort of type of Lyme disease that are in the Ixodes pacifica ticks. So those are the deer ticks that are hanging out on the West Coast. So they're sort of everywhere, but The new germ, or more virulent germ of Lyme disease, was discovered in the 80s in and around Lyme, Connecticut. And that one was different.
Yes, which we're going to learn about, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember in the 80s hearing about this and just, it was a big story, but shallow, not a lot of detail, right? Just
Hmm.
watch out, people, there's limes, that kind of a thing.
Hmm.
So, real basic, if somebody finds a tick on themselves, just pull it off. Do they need to do anything special? Or, I mean, once it gets in them, whatever it is, that's a whole different story. But
Yeah. Don't squeeze it or twist it or burn it off, because then whatever
oh,
germs are in its gut, it will regurgitate it into your body. Bad idea. So the thing to do is find a tweezer and pinch the mouthpiece right against the skin and pull it straight out.
hmm.
And that's the best way. And then definitely wash your hands, because whatever it's in its saliva can get into your eyes or your mouth,
Oh
but
boy.
your eyes mostly. So do that. Then I always recommend, and CDC doesn't recommend this for a weird set of reasons, is that you take that tick and place it in a plastic baggie with a teeny piece of damp paper towel and send the tick in to a local lab or a commercial lab. And the local labs are slow but free, your health department. The commercial labs, you can get results back in a couple days. And the nice thing about the commercial labs are that they'll screen for all the deadly tick-borne diseases if you pay for that. And
Hmm.
it might be $70, $50 to $70, but if you're bitten by a tick and you get Lyme disease, you won't create antibodies in a way that will show up on the human tests for about a month. So
Oh
the
boy.
nice thing about sending the tick in is you'll know all the germs that were in it, because they're at universities, they're reliable labs, and you may not have that disease, but you can watch for the symptoms and then go to your doctor if you have any of those symptoms. And they all sort of start out like summer flu
Yeah.
symptoms.
No, that's great. And your story is an interesting one. I'm sure we'll get into the challenge of maneuvering through the experiences you had till you even understood what it was you had. This kind of lends into my next question. You've partially answered it, but I was wondering when it seems to me after reading the book that it's important to try to get the right treatment and not go a very long period of time where the doctors don't know what it is and they do a shotgun approach to check everything and nothing comes out. So many times that happens with our medical system the way it is, where they're not able to diagnose correctly. So I love the suggestion about putting it in a bag and sending it in. Is there anything else a person should do just to make sure that they get a jump start on maybe addressing what they just got infected with?
Yeah. So uh, I would recommend, and where my husband and I got Lyme disease and babesiosis, another tick-borne disease, is if you go to the ER on Martha's Vineyard, they'll give you 2 weeks of doxy if you pull out a tick. And
Mhm.
if one of my kids pulled out a bloated tick, I would immediately start with 2 weeks of doxycycline, because I've seen the worst of the worst cases and it's not worth the risk.
Yeah.
So my husband and I, we were bitten in 2002. Then we went back to California, and they're just not savvy on Lyme disease, and they just think it's a rare disease. And um, so it took us a year, 10 doctors, and $60,000 to get diagnosed. And by then,
Oh
we
my.
had horrible symptoms. I would say it's a combination of chronic, like blasted chronic fatigue, Alzheimer's. We couldn't function as normal adults. Fibromyalgia with pains that would travel around our body. Arthritis. My husband couldn't even hold a drill or a pencil without pain. I was a writer and I couldn't read or write because
Oh my.
I was reading my kids Harry Potter, and I would read one sentence and I would forget that sentence, and I'd have to go back and back and back. I couldn't read anymore. So it's horrible. And so don't do what we did and get it treated. I mean, doxycycline, super cheap drug,
Yeah.
well tested, not risky, harmless, and you'll make sure you kill, or at least impede, the Lyme disease. You'll kill Rocky Mountain spotted fever, or you won't kill the viruses, but a lot of times people get really, really chronically ill when they have multiple tick-borne diseases at once, and that's what you want to avoid.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds terrible. I mean, like, scary right there. Before learning some of this, my thought was, oh, you'll get Lyme disease and you'll just kind of get the flu. Hello, not that. So much worse. The things that you've just described remind me of COVID and other things, which maybe we'll see if there's some commonalities there later. But it's interesting to me that certain places around the country, they didn't, especially back then, really understand what they were looking at. Would you say that's still the case today, or has that the medical field gotten better about that?
Well, I've been in this field since 2002, and I think very little has gotten better. I mean, I hate to say that.
Yeah.
It's against all my wishes because I've been trying hard to educate, but there's still a lot of ignorance in the medical community, especially about the chronic part of the disease. There is no controversy about, if you know you have Lyme disease, treat it early.
Yeah.
And then you'll go on with your life and never think about that tick. But if you have the chronic forms, like, some people have a really hard time getting better. I
Yeah.
feel very fortunate that after 5 years, I got better. But after that, I vowed I would do everything I could to prevent this from happening to other families.
Thank you, Chris, for doing that, because many people, this is going to help a lot of people. You know that already, but thank you, because I'm just another person saying it, but thank you. Before we jump into the book, you said something a little while ago, rickettsia, and I remember that name through the book. Can you define that again for us?
Okay. Well, the Lyme spirochete is a big, long, 1 micron long, snaky kind of bacteria. A rickettsial is so small, they thought it was a virus forever and ever. But it's a tiny bacteria, almost virus size, that hacks into a cell and then depletes energy in the cell and creates lots of toxins. So what are rickettsias? Well, their Rocky Mountain spotted fever is caused by a rickettsia, and anaplasmosis and HGE, which are other esoteric tick-borne diseases that are mostly around the Great Lakes. They're ricketsias. So it's important to know that for the punchline in the book later on.
Yeah. Okay. The book, 30 packed chapters of information. People, you got to read the book. I don't know what to say. Just read this book. I took notes, and I had so many notes as I was reading your book. It's amazing. So let's get into it. Take us on a stroll through the book in any way you want or think makes sense. I'll probably have some questions, but let's go. Let's hop into it.
Yeah, it started with my family's story. We go to Martha's Vineyard with our 2 middle school boys, and my husband and I get back. We get sicker than we ever been. It takes us a year. We can hardly work at the end of it. There was a point where we thought we were both going to die and leave our kids as orphans, because the medical system, the way it is they are convinced that it's a rare disease, and they wouldn't even test for Lyme disease in the first 8 months because they said it's a rare disease. They said an infectious disease specialist at Stanford says, for you both to have gotten this disease at the same time would be like winning the lottery. Another infectious disease guy said, well, you have so many weird symptoms traveling around your body. We think it's a psychosomatic couples thing where you, Chris, are needing attention from your busy Silicon Valley husband, and you're making up these symptoms to get attention from him, and he's mirroring these symptoms to show his empathy. So,
What in the
a
world?
lot of people with chronic Lyme, because it's called protean in medicine, the symptoms move around. It just ends up looking like hypochondria.
Hmm.
So the first part is about that. And then it's about my journey in making a film about Lyme disease. Because I said, obviously, the information about this disease on the CDC site and on the medical textbooks is wrong. Because
Yeah.
once we went to a knowledgeable doctor, she said, "Oh yeah, you guys have Lyme disease. This is what we're going to do," and we slowly got better. So I thought, well, I'm going to do a documentary. And I teamed up with a Marin filmmaker, Andy Wilson, very talented. And we spent the next 3.5 years doing an indie film on what the patients see on the ground. So we had about 5 patients, their stories of being misdiagnosed and then correctly diagnosed and their recovery. So it gave a lot of patients hope. And I also covered the conflicts of interest in medicine about this disease that have messed it up, in that in around 1980, 81, when Lyme disease organism was discovered, there was a change in the laws in medicine where physicians and the NIH and the CDC could profit off discoveries from universities and team up with big pharma and earn royalties that can equal their salary from big pharma for a vaccine or a surface protein of the germ that is used in a test kit. So all of a sudden you had a, like it's hard for people to know who weren't in the 80s around Lyme, Connecticut, what a big deal it was. But like, people were getting so sick. Children would be on crutches in Lyme, Connecticut.
Hmm.
Their knees would be swollen like very large grapefruits. There was a lot of mental illness. So it
Wow.
was a big deal. And so all of a sudden, Willie Bergdorfer from the Rocky Mountain Lab discovered and said, well, we figured this out. No big deal. 2 weeks of doxycycline will cure it. So anyways, the first thing is my story and the discovery story. And that's where things get strange.
Yeah.
And I had, by the time we launched this film, which it was an Oscar semifinalist, and which is amazing for a disease film.
Yeah.
I said to my husband, "Oh my gosh, I've just spent the last 5 years working on this film, and I'm better finally. So uh, I'm going to quit Lyme and pass the torch to someone else. I got a really good job in the medical school at Stanford doing science writing." I said,
Hmm.
"I am done." But then this is the high strangeness, the
Yeah.
synchronicity, the thing like God telling you, Chris, I know you want to forget you were ever sick, but remember that promise you made? We need you to stick with it. So 2 weeks after I tell that to my husband, I'm at a family birthday party of his in Texas in this huge starter castle in
Hmm.
Frisco, and uh, everyone's family except for this one guy who's pretty much in his cups at the kitchen table, grizzly guy in his 70s. And so I don't know much of my husband's side of the family. So I'm sitting and chatting him up. And I said, well, what did you do,
Hmm.
before you retired? He says, I work for the company, the CIA Black Ops. And then
Of course.
he's like the grizzly guy on the ship in Jaws.
Yeah.
And then he starts talking about all the crazy stuff with Operation Phoenix that he did in Vietnam, which are basically assassinations. And then at the very end of it, he goes, but the weirdest thing I ever did was drop infected ticks on the Cuban sugarcane workers in 1962. And about
Oh
that time,
my.
my jaw just like dropped on the kitchen
Oh,
table, and my husband was there too. And his eyes got like saucers, and we looked at each other. It's like, oh my gosh. So the rest of the evening, I just picked his brain about the tick stuff, and he had no idea who I was.
wow.
And I would run into the bathroom and write notes about it. And I didn't know anything about the Cold War or the Bay of Pigs, but I, I went home and said, well, this seems like it's really dangerous information. I don't know if I can pursue that. But then a couple weeks later, one of my documentary friends said, he calls me and he's breathless and he's driving about 80 miles an hour from Hamilton, Montana, where the Lyme discoverer lives, Willie Bergdorfer. Says, Chris, I just interviewed Willie Bergdorfer and he says he thinks Lyme disease is a bioweapon. Oh my gosh. So those two things together, it's like it's a fork in the road in my life. Go back to the normal life where I just write safe science things or write dangerous science things. So those two things were worthless in the journalism world because it was single sourced. We have two old guys, an ex-CIA guy and a scientist who maybe he's just trying to get attention. So that started a 3.5-year process to try and document their claims. I'd go back with interviews. I came across, Willie Bergdorfer, the discoverer of Lyme disease, during the interview. So I'll just tell you the punchline, the big reveals is Willie Bergdorfer told me I was brought over from Switzerland in 1951 for the bioweapons program where I worked for over a decade. My job was to weaponize fleas, ticks, and mosquitoes. And by weaponizing, I mean he would take those insects and inject in them in various ways dangerous, deadly, or incapacitating diseases. And then he did pilot studies. Then he would throw them over to Fort Detrick's bug-borne weapons program in Maryland, and they would do larger studies. And then they would do feasibility studies at Dugway Proving Grounds in Utah. And all, with the objective was these 8-legged soldiers, you could drop them on an enemy, a city that you're planning on invading. It would make the soldiers sick, the citizens sick. It would tie up their medical resources, and no one would know what happened. And then it would make it easier for a land invasion later on. So it's just so evil, but that's what he said.
That's the word that came to my mind. That's like evil. It really is. I mean, we know things happen, right, in wartime, but the planning of it, right, to think about, let's do this. It's a dark place. I want to tell the audience that I love the way you went through in the book Willie and helping us understand things about him. Went over periods of years. You talked about things with him, and that's amazing. So people should check that out as they read and really find some things there that I think are very interesting.
Yeah. So what's really interesting is my dad was career Navy. He delivered the first drums of Agent Orange to Vietnam. So you could boil it down to daddy issues. Like, why did my dad do that? Why did he think it's a good idea at the time? But you look at Willie, he was from the lower classes in Basel, Switzerland, and he was a climber. He was ambitious. He had an ego, and he got an offer to go with the biological weapons program in Hamilton, Montana, and he would have his own lab and his own lab assistant just starting out as a new PhD. And it was great. It was exciting. He got to travel around in black government cars and get top secret security clearances. And it was really, really great. But I think as all of us, he was 27 at the time, you get more mature and you see the bigger picture.
Yeah.
I mean, when he had his first 2 boys, he was putting bubonic plague and fleas, figuring out how to package them in tubes inside of cluster bombs so that both organisms would be alive when they were dropped. He was putting yellow fever, which is a flavivirus like wet snile, into mosquitoes, and then a lot of dangerous germs inside of ticks. So rabies virus, Venezuelan equine encephalitis, relapsing fever, all these things. And he's trying to find the perfect combo where both organisms would live, and then you could drop them on an enemy and they wouldn't arouse suspicion. So it was very crude gain of function. And, he did the early studies. Fort Detrick would refine them.
That's, it had to have eaten him. I mean, is that the sense you got towards the end there?
That what?
This whole path of life for him, it was eating at him. It had to have been. Do you feel like that's where he was at the end, or?
Yes. So mid-career, he spent some time in Europe and he realized he had done all this really good work, but he couldn't publish on it because it was all classified.
Hmm.
And plus, people wouldn't really respect it. I mean, and towards the end, he really wanted to win the Nobel Prize. He said that, but not realizing that I think people would judge harshly the nature of his research.
Yeah.
Then I think there was a turning point with him where well, there are two things. First of all, when he was in the frenzy of discovery where you really, really have to prove this spirochetal organism causes Lyme disease, or in his case, it causes the rash. And so he was working all weekend and some infected rabbit urine was splashed in his eye and he got Lyme disease and he got really, really sick. So I think he had empathy for the patients at that point.
Yeah.
But the other thing that tore at his soul is that when you're a research scientist, the important thing is to publish or perish. And when you publish, you state your hypothesis, you state the evidence that supports this hypothesis. For example, that the spirochete causes what we call Lyme disease. And then if you have any doubts, you put that in the discussion section. And what he told me, which was a shocker, is that there was another organism, a rickettsia, that he suspected was making people sick too. But he was told by some unknown power on high that he needed to remove that from the paper. And indeed, I found his original handwritten drafts of the Science magazine paper, and he had mentioned the rickettsial. Well, maybe the disease could be caused by this, but it got deleted. And why is that? He says, I think that was one of the bioweapons that my lab worked on during the Cold War. And so at that point, I mean, a lot of what I do in the book is I put what he said into context of the overall bioweapons program.
Yeah.
So you have to know it was a huge program, as large as and as secretive as the Manhattan Project. And now I can't remember where I was going. Lost it. But so he was told to cover it up because at that point, the 50s, they were putting germs in insects. 60s, they said, well, that's too complicated to keep two things alive. So they moved to just germs, aerosolized germs. So what they would do is they'd brew germs like Rocky Mountain spotted fever germ, which is called Rickettsia rickettsii, in large tanks like you would brew beer. And then they would dry those bacterial spores and then they would aerosolize them. So the plan was for the enemy, they would spray them from planes or buoys or scuba men or with blowers in the back of trucks or through the air ducts of, for example, the Pentagon. So that was the plan. And so Willie knew about those experiments. He was the chief of the rickettsial section. So he was afraid that the thing that was making people sick in Lyme was maybe the Lyme spirochete and the rickettsia. Yale was thinking it was a virus because they had been working with a lot of weaponized viruses. So the bottom line is there was a cover-up. Willie was afraid he was going to be deported. He said that, which is weird because he was an American citizen.
Yeah.
So that was the first level of mystery. And you might have questions about the other mysterious stuff in his life.
Yes. Yeah, I don't know how much you want to go into the details of him because he's a big part of the book. And to me, some of the most interesting stuff in there as well.
Yeah. I mean, I think
I want to leave it up to you as to how much you want to share because that's people, there's like a box of information you're going to dive into in the book, but yeah.
So to me, what was interesting is Willie's gray areas. people ask me, was he a good man or a bad man? And I say, yes.
Yeah.
Because he had his character arc was so interesting. He was ambitious. He had his retro moment when he realized he was doing germs of mass destruction
Mm.
for the NIH. And then he had a turn of heart, but not a total turn of heart, because it made my job researching everything. I couldn't wrap it all up.
Yeah.
But yeah, what was interesting is when he had that turn of heart, he did some interesting things. Like he started going to international conferences and filming people with a Super 8 camera, meeting with a lot of Russians. He had a mistress at that time. He had after this one really important Austrian conference where there were a lot of Russians. He opened a secret Swiss bank account and didn't tell his family. I mean, his sons didn't know about it. I asked them. His second wife didn't know about it. His first wife died
Yeah.
for a complicated set of reasons I don't want to get into. But then, so he's got the secret bank account. Well, people can have secret bank accounts for a lot of reasons. But I know from reading his letters and talking to him and his sons, he had a lot of money issues. His wife spent a lot. His boys wanted new cars and wanted to go to college. I mean, he had a lot of money pressures about the time that the money just appeared in the secret Swiss bank account. And he had a double set of books where instead of just using your checkbook ledger, he had these linen books that said property of the federal government on the back. And he all of a sudden started doing his bank balancing right after the Austrian conference. And anytime he needed money, it would be an entry from some mysterious insurance policy, which is a common strategy when you're a spy. They say, don't spend anything lavishly, keep a double set of books, say you're getting money from an insurance policy. I mean, if it was a Soviet or Czech spy, that's what they would teach you.
Yeah.
So a lot of that stuff got pulled from the book, from the Bitten, the book.
Yeah.
But that's the kind of stuff that keeps me up at night.
Yes.
And no FOIAs or Freedom of Information Acts have revealed anything more than that. And I hired a forensic accountant, and she said, yeah, this is really suspicious. I called in a guy who used to work for the Defense Intelligence Service. He says, yeah, he went through all the evidence and says, if he was on my watch, I would go the next level.
Yeah.
But of course, it's a Swiss bank account. You can't break that.
Wow. That's scary. A bit.
I mean, the thing is, maybe he sold samples from the bioweapons program to fund his various projects.
Yeah.
Right after the secret bank account and the double set of books, he all of a sudden built a new garage and he added onto his house. So he went from feeling poor to doing a lot of projects. He bought his kid a new car.
Yeah. There's some things that aren't right about that.
I know.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, you opened up something that's kind of scary.
Yeah, so something that I never would have imagined. I mean,
yeah.
I was a tech writer in Silicon Valley making good money.
You're like, what have I done?
I know. Nobody wants this information published.
Yeah. Well, there's so many, what's the word I'm looking for? I mean, there's evidence of misinformation everywhere. Do you feel like when you tried to research or look at different places and different people, do you feel like you were getting the runaround, or is it really so compartmentalized that that they conveniently keep pieces of information in places where people can't get to it? Like, you did some diving in a way that you went right to the source about some of these things. But I'm sure you probably had tackled this a few different ways. Did you feel like you were getting a runaround from people?
The Lyme community didn't want me to touch it because they felt like we already have a hard enough battle here, just getting more than 2 to 4 weeks of antibiotics, which is the only way to cure it when it's in the chronic form right
Yeah.
now. So they said, don't touch that. We're already stigmatized. Um, the It was such a compartmentalized program. I don't think a lot of Willie's colleagues, who are all younger than him,
Mhm.
he was 86 when I went out there, I think, knew about it.
Yeah.
And like January of 2019, his colleagues saw the marketing blurb on online on the HarperCollins site, and they just reamed me up and down for making up stuff, being a yellow journalist, on and on. And then when they got a copy in May 2019, there was hushed silence.
Of course.
And so I think some of his colleagues were read into it at that point. And then they just hoped that it went away. And of course, 6 months later, NIH is completely consumed with the COVID thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I think what really killed my book sales was right after it came out, Congressman Chris Smith from New Jersey waved it up at the DoD defense budget hearings and said, this book, Bitten, is really credible. And I think public health is being harmed by this release of fleas, ticks, and mosquitoes, mostly ticks, on the eastern seaboard. And I think the DoD needs to investigate it, just like, they have taken care of vets harmed by Agent Orange and the burn pits. You break it, you fix it, DoD. But he's put it in the budget for the last 4 years. I think it's in the budget now for the DoD, the investigation.
Yeah.
But it gets killed every time. Not necessarily because people don't want to know, though they don't want to know, but because there's a lot of partisan stuff going on.
How does that make you feel? It's got to be pretty frustrating.
Yeah, I think there's a general overclassification of these 50 to 70-year-old bio and chemical weapons accidents, nuclear too. And especially with the living things, the biological weapons, there's a lot of reasons to disclose it. For example, with the ticks, the bioweapons program did a lot of open air, uncontrolled experiments, in Utah at Dugway, in Florida, they dropped mosquitoes on the poor Black communities in Georgia and Florida. They released radioactive ticks on coastal Virginia to see how far they'd creep. And so, anyways, these releases of non-native organisms in strange places have long-lasting effects on the environment. It disrupts the natural order of things. And one of the reasons bioweapons are so effective is that, like you or I or bunny rabbits or raccoons, over hundreds of years, we develop natural immunity to the organisms around us and the parasites. If you introduce something new, there's going to be a lot of death and destruction.
Yeah.
And so I think that's what happened around Lyme disease. There were experiments on Plum Island, which was the anti-animal bioweapons program around there. Maybe some of those got out. Maybe there were dump sites in Lyme, Connecticut when their incinerators broke, et cetera. So I haven't been able to figure out what the root cause is. I just know 3 freaky new tick-borne diseases showed up around the Connecticut River in Long Island. 12 miles as the crow flies from Plum Island. It's suspicious.
Very.
And I'll keep looking into it with the hopes that I can figure out the root cause. A lot of people are dying. The witnesses are dying now. So it's a race.
Talking about Dugway here, I remember one of the things that was brought up, it was what's the area that they killed the sheep over? I can't
Skull
remember.
Valley.
Skull Valley.
Mhm.
And I wasn't sure where that was. And as I looked, unless I found the wrong place, it's up towards like Grantsville, isn't it? In that area?
It's very close to Tooele and Grantsville.
What in the world? I mean, so, we think, oh, surely they wouldn't release anything in the area of Lyme, Connecticut. But I don't really believe that they would. I don't believe there's anything they wouldn't do. I mean, some of the things we've talked about, you covered in your book. I mean, this is accidental in some cases, but come on. I mean, what in the world is going on?
Well, it was willful blindness by the Defense Department. The ends justify the means. We need to fight those commies. There'll be a little collateral damage in the way of Americans, but this is important enough that it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So my next project is about the Skull Valley incident, 1968. 6,000 sheep dropped dead in Skull Valley. That's very close to Tooele and Grantsville. It's 50 miles as the crow flies
Yeah.
to Salt Lake. And anyone who lives there knows that salty dust goes a long way.
Right.
Or if you're familiar with the Nevada nuclear tests, that nuclear fallout went all the way to New York State and ruined Kodak film. So stuff blows.
Right. This
So
is,
I'm studying that incident with contemporary eyes now that some stuff has been declassified, and interviewing the survivors. So to me, the point is with Lyme disease and Skull Valley, like, what are we thinking? These are weapons that don't make any sense. They're
right.
just wet dreams for Pentagon military planners. There's both chemical weapons and biological weapons. There's unavoidable blowback for our own people.
Yeah.
So why are we spending so much money on these? And why is it okay to harm Americans and cover it up and never release those documents?
Right. And it's not even just that, although that's terrible. It's the opening of the Pandora box of putting something that we really don't have a history. It's been created in a way, this monster, and you put it out there and see what happens.
And you can't take it back. Oh,
Yeah.
COVID, if
Yeah.
COVID truly is from a lab leak,
I
you
wanted to
can't take
get
it
your
back. It's
feelings on
out
that.
there.
I wanted to get your feelings on COVID, right? Like there's some commonalities here in a way. It looks like it. What are your thoughts about COVID?
So I feel like Lyme disease was the prequel to what happened with COVID. You have with Lyme disease and bat spike proteins, you have NIH projects that are outside of public scrutiny. There are no adults in the room, just a bunch of virologists who are used to living in a 1 inch by 2 inch area, their microscope.
Yeah.
And there's so the experiments get out of hand, and it's almost guaranteed there'll be lab leaks. You have a lab tech who went drinking the night before and drops a vial on the floor. It happens.
Yeah.
So we need to have better oversight on whether um, these experiments are conducted at all. It reminds me in Jurassic Park, Dr. Ian says, just because the scientists can do it doesn't mean they should.
Amen to that, right?
Right.
Jeez.
So the other thing is other echoes are that CDC was formed right after World War II as a sentry for biological weapons accidents. So they sort of have secrecy in their DNA since 1947. And
Yeah.
I think with both the COVID release and the Lyme, whatever Lyme is, is it a rickettsia and a spirochete? We don't know. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't want to say anything till I have proof, but they aren't forthright in communicating to the American public. And both with Lyme and COVID, it looks like for example, with COVID, it looks like the data I've seen, ivermectin and hydrochloroquine do a really good job of early cases, keeping people out of the hospital.
Mhm.
And yet there was censorship on that. With Lyme disease, because of this profit motive that turned up in the 80s, there was more money in a vaccine that you have to take every year than $10 of doxycycline right in the beginning. There's no money in curing a disease
Yeah.
or diagnosing it early. So I I don't know that way, but for COVID and Lyme, that happened. Oh, let's put all our eggs in the vaccine basket
Yeah.
and throw the chronic people under the bus.
I mean, I have to be honest, I'm getting sick to my stomach thinking about this. I really am. It's like a false sense of security in this country. We, not to go too deep in this, but really this what it is at the base. Can we trust certain entities or groups in our government? Like, come on. Like this just you don't do this to anybody or to an area of the country or anything like that. But there's not a lot of thought, to me, intelligence in putting something out there and just, hey, let's see what happens. It's crazy.
Yeah, and I think NIH and CDC have lost a lot of trust with the American people. And it's going to be really hard to
Yeah.
regain that trust. I mean, it's like if you have a spouse who cheated on you,
Right.
now every time they stay out late at work, are they really at late? You know, so is this vaccine really working? You know, so
Yeah.
they're gonna need a strong hand at the top to earn back trust. And it makes me upset. And people who don't do the deep dive on the Wuhan stuff and the Lyme disease stuff, I'll tell them this and they just won't believe me. They just think I'm a tinfoil hat person, but
Right.
wow, it's real.
It is. And I think I spoke to somebody not about this, but COVID before, not as an interview, just personally. And they really were like, oh, this is all just, conspiracy stuff. And I'm like, are you really going to just dismiss this like this? Like, are you going to put your head in the sand? Because really, it didn't take a whole lot of just paying attention and being alert to the way things rolled out around that. There should be and is a lot of questions around that if you're alert and just paying attention. And for somebody to just dismiss it like that, to me, it's scary. Like that's what they're probably hoping for. That we'll go back to Monday Night Football and everything like that, and we'll think about these critical issues and question what's going on, with groups that are tasked with protecting us and should have our best interests in mind, but they don't. I want to ask you a question about tested 27 human volunteers in Montana State Prison. I think I saw that in your book in the early chapters, and it was like, that's just another example of what in the world. Although I thought it might have said they were volunteers, but what
Well, they're
constitutes
in prison,
volunteering? Yeah.
right? That's largely not covered in my book
Mhm.
because there wasn't room. But he was testing a Colorado tick fever virus, which was a Rio virus, and they wanted to use that as a bioweapon. So they tested on prisoners. Uh, I read the experiments on the mouse brains, and it really messed up mouse brains. So I don't know what happened to the Montana prisoners. I couldn't get any records on that. And of course, they
Of
wouldn't
course.
keep those records. There was also a test for a vaccine at Snowmass, Colorado, with a bunch of monks on Colorado tick fever virus. And that's out of Colorado State, which is right near the CDC. And I also tried to dig up information on that, but a lot of the survivors are dead. But yeah, what happened to those monks? And the military used to do that a lot. They would test on monks and nuns because they knew they wouldn't be affecting families. But again, it's just like, oh my gosh, that's so evil.
That is evil. That is totally.
It was so at Stanford, I worked in the clinical trials group for 10 years. And the hoops that had to be jumped to do any kind of drug or vaccine trial were so great. And it's a pain for the people running the clinical trial. It's expensive for pharma.
Mhm.
But after researching this book, I think, well, there is good reason for that.
Right.
Because these people in these early military vaccine experiments, they had no idea what they were getting into. For example, Fort Detrick had the 8-ball, which is 1,000-liter sphere where they would test animals and humans with vaccines and aerosolized germs. And they would mostly test it on Seventh-day Adventists who had opted out of the Vietnam War or the Korean War as conscientious objectors.
Yeah.
And the people I interviewed in the Army said, well, no one died, but there were lawsuits after.
It's like every time you bring up one of these, I'm just shaking my head like, I can't believe this. But why would I shouldn't be surprised. I mean, this is the world we live in. I mean, it's
Yeah.
just
So, I mean, my purpose is, I guess, I have thick skin for this stuff now,
Mhm.
but I'm hoping to spread the word and shine a light on it so we don't repeat history. And my
Yes.
big complaint is, as long as all this stuff is classified still, we're going to repeat these mistakes, i.e. COVID.
Yeah. So I know your goal eventually is to really get some honesty around this and for people to take it seriously. Do you see steps or milestones coming before you, or do you have like, let's get to this point, let's get to this point? Or is this a matter of you just got to hit everywhere you can and see what sticks and then work from there to try to get people to respond to this the right way?
Well, the biggest thing is the rise of podcasts, I think,
Yes.
because there were a lot of government and military plants in mainstream media. The New York Times, the Washington Post, the fact that they basically ran a review of my book from someone who was in the biosecurity machine and they didn't fact check it and they didn't check him for conflicts, or they didn't think it was important to talk about the
Right.
conflicts. So now with podcasts, with people like you or Rogan, Tucker Carlson, RFK Jr., the truth is getting out, and people will start asking questions, and hopefully we can reform it. But I don't think just one little me can make a big difference. My purpose is to say to people, we don't know what this is in those ticks, so just
Yeah.
take it seriously and protect you and your family.
Yes, and generate some momentum here to get some discussion around this.
Yeah, and then every week I work on trying to get things declassified so we know what was released where, so we don't have to drag for ticks in every little town in every state. If
Yeah.
we know that this disease, there were some pilot studies, for example, near University of Wisconsin, which ran a biological weapons program. We know what to test for and what to treat for.
Mm.
So a lot of these tick-borne diseases take different drugs to cure it.
Yeah. Well, look, I know we're getting towards the end of our hour, but can I ask you the whole process around trying to get items declassified? Can you talk about that for a minute? Like people, I'm not sure how that process even works. I mean, are you seeing success in trying to get that to happen, or is that like pulling teeth to try to get, things that are classified, maybe declassified?
Yeah, I think it's been pretty frustrating. I mean, I got my most valuable stuff from Willie Bergdorfer's secret garage, where he
Right.
didn't turn over his lab books and his letters and to the NIH, who then censored them probably, and put them in the National Archives in Maryland. So the process is, you sort of
Yeah.
have to know the document you want to get, and then you request through citing the Freedom of Information Act for that document.
Yeah.
You go through the Army or the Navy or the Environmental Protection Agency, and then they have to answer you in 21 days. Are they going to do it? Mostly they just say, we're really busy and we'll get back to you when we get back to you. If it's the CIA, I've had one request into them for about 5 years, and every
Oh my
year on the
gosh.
anniversary they say, I'll get back to you in another year, maybe. Uh,
Of
Now
course.
there are theoretically, for military documents, after 37 years they have to declassify it, but they can always say national security, forget it.
Yeah.
Or if they did joint experiments with the UK, it's 47 years. There is a MDR, which is a mandatory classification request, but a lot of times I'm so busy with the project,
Mhm.
there's a tiny time frame to file that, and I miss the deadline a lot. So
Yeah.
I would say, if you want to do that, go to Muckrock, and you can file a certain number of free requests, and they make the filing really easy, and they tell you when they respond, and they'll do little annoying reminders to the agencies that you file the request with. So
Muck
muckrock.com
rock. Hmm.
is a journalist's friend.
Nice. I hope this kind of gets people excited to try to look into things. You're doing a great job in this area. Thank you so much. And others can pick this up when they run across strange things. I think it's interesting that you said that, or I interpret it as your best information mostly came from that garage. That's amazing to me, right? It tells you a lot, actually. It really does tell you a lot about the system and the way things are set up to drag and slow down truth from coming out. And we see it in a lot of places.
Yeah, I mean, I would say before you go to an archive, talk to the people involved, because a lot of people save papers at home.
Yes. Yes. Well, as we get towards the end here, thank you so much for the time. Is there anything else you want to say about the the book or just even the research or anything like that? We've covered some things, but I do really want to push people to buy the book because we would never be able to talk about 50% of it on this. And it kept me very interested at the edge of my seat on a lot of
Well,
things.
thank you so much for the resounding review. And
Yeah.
uh, I appreciate your audience, because I'm obsessed with finding out the truth, like your audience.
Yes.
And just, if you have your special thing you're investigating, keep going.
That's great.
I
Yeah.
mean, I started out doing Bitten on the side and of my Stanford job, and it's a fun process. I think
Yeah.
you rise to the challenge. Well, they won't let me have this one report. Where else can I get it? Like,
Mhm.
does his wife have his file cabinet in her
Right.
garage? That's kind of stuff.
I love that. It's like block, go around there, find upside, underneath, whatever, until you get to what you need.
Yeah.
I love that. Chris, what's next for you? We know you're working on a project right now.
The Skull Valley book. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's it. And then, because I was obsessed with 6,000 sheep in Park City in November, 13 pregnant Angus cows, 2,000 pounds apiece, dropped dead in Park City. So I
Really?
I am looking into that as maybe a light article,
Yeah. So
just
this was
using the same techniques that they used in trying to figure out what killed the sheep.
this happened this year?
In November 2023.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
So I actually called up the vet who solved the Skull Valley sheep incident, and he gave me
Mhm.
some ideas to pursue on the science end of things.
Yeah. Very interesting. That work that that project you're working on now, does this look like that'll be available in 2025, or is that
I think that's what I'm hoping.
yeah, that's great. Can't wait to look at that as well and
Yeah.
learn. How can people find you electronically and follow your work?
So my book site is chrisnewby.com. That's KrisNewby.com. And then I have a Substack where I'm rolling out new evidence that I find for the Lyme disease mystery. And that's go to Substack and just enter Chris Newby. And then the book can be purchased, audio version, Kindle version, anywhere you buy books.
Yeah.
Because it's HarperCollins.
Do it, people. Learn something. You'll be
Well, and
amazed.
protect your family. I mean,
Yeah.
ticks, nasty beasts.
Yeah. Well, before I wrap up, it's interesting because after reading the book, so my son, my oldest son, who served a mission in Ghana, LDS church mission, and he, when he came back, we were back east, and he had been bitten by a tick. And I remember this because we were on the Jersey Shore, just off one of the boats. And my sister-in-law was like, "Here, come here, let me rip that off there." And she pulls it off. But he's had some strange things going on. It's probably from what he got in Ghana, because it was an interesting mission for him. But I immediately, after reading your book, thought, is there anything here? I just started thinking. So, people, when you learn some of these things and you see what's going on, it does open your eyes. Things that you might just not even consider or just pass by in your life make you stop for a second and go, what does this mean? And I think that's super important.
Yeah, and to question the medical system, because the body of knowledge in medicine is expanding and it's getting more specialized. And a lot of these specialists don't look at the whole you. You say, well, I'm just really, really been tired. And the doctor say, oh, yeah, everyone's tired now. No, So ask questions, get second opinions.
Yes.
That's what my husband and I have learned. And a lot of times we have to go outside of the medical system to get the best person for what you think you have.
Yeah.
And it's expensive, but it's not as expensive as being chronically ill and not being able to work. And we all want to work. We all want to work.
Agreed. Something tells me there's many more unacknowledged truths out there that we people can run into and find. Chris, good luck with all the things that you're working on. I'm going to keep watching, and I'm sure we'll bump into each other again. And I'm looking forward to your next project, to reading that as well. Thank you for all that you've done in this area and just the hard work and research and everything. And I want to wish you a wonderful holiday season. Okay.
Oh, thank you too, Tony. And thanks. I'm glad I met you and I got the invitation to be on. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. And for the rest of you out there, have a very happy holiday season as well. And remember, there's a lot of strange and unexpected in our reality. So always keep your eyes, ears, and minds open. And until next time, stay safe.
Thank you for listening to High Strangeness. This was a glance at some of the strange that exists in our reality.